Okay, Max, thanks a lot. I think the first question I was going to ask you, you sort of touched on in your opening comments there, but you guys are recognized as one of the marquee examples of somebody that's used lean startup strategies um, so openly in your faking your comments. But really, what are the key things that you guys did that are different than either the startups that you worked at in the past or founded, and what you see a lot of other startups doing?
I mean, for me, it's all about internalizing two lessons about a startup. And one is that it's going to take a long time. And two is that you're almost definitely wrong. And if you approach the problem believing those two things, you make fundamentally different choices. So, if you get together in a room and you think to yourself, well, what's the product that we should be building? And you are very sure of yourself, then you're going to go and build that product. And it's probably going to take 6-9 months, and then you're going to come out with it, and you're probably going to be wrong. If you assume I'm probably wrong, and if I spend 9 months doing this in a vacuum, I'm going to build the wrong thing, then you spend more time up front trying to figure out what you should be building in the first place. And part of that is faking things, part of it is minimum viable product, part of it is doing more user research, qualitative and quantitative, part of it is learning more from what other people did, but all of that relates to the same idea, which is I'm probably wrong, how do I offset that? And if you've internalized that it takes a long time, then you're less frustrated to spend 6 months figuring out what you should do, or 3 months figuring out your name, because you're less antsy to just jump into it.
Max, when I heard your presentation, one of the things that was very helpful for me is I was going through, running down a couple of dead ends, and I found that it was taking me a long time. Can you give me a sense of the time it took you, where you just tried things? And you laid out a slide here in your presentation, talk how long you tested things, how long it took you to figure out which product to go.
Yeah, that's right. So for us, it was essentially half a year on what I call product conception. And that was picking a problem, prototyping in serial, and basically abandoning ideas. And that was not coincidental. We forced ourselves to take 6 months to conceive of a product. And if we'd allowed ourselves to do it in a week, we would have conceived of the product in a week and moved on to the next phase. But we actually forced ourselves to. It's like before you get married saying, I'm only going to get married to someone if I date them for at least a year. Well, it's not surprising that you would, end up not marrying people that you would marry if you allowed yourself to get married after a week. So the first phase is the kind of conception phase, and I'd say you want to spend a half year on that at least and actually force yourself. And then we spend a year on what I call implementation. And this was, once we decided what to build, basically building refinements of that. Now for us, we were still doing Wizard of Oz testing where it wasn't an end-to-end automated system, but we kind of knew what we were doing. And while we were doing that, we were recruiting the core team and raising seed financing. And mind you, we raised our Series A before we built an end-to-end product, but there was enough there that we could kind of show this is what we're going to do, and the VC was going to take the lead, that we would actually be able to automate that and scale it. And then we spent kind of a year on refinement, which is, essentially building the team. We tripled the team over that period. It's starting to get really into the nitty-gritty of positioning and features, and it's taking the space that you've defined and the product that you've defined and really owning it in terms of press and thought leadership and having people, at least in the little tech bubble, think of you in the same sentence when they think of your larger space or your larger problem.
So what was a longer length of time from the day you guys said, let's start a company till you found the MVP, or the length of time between MVP and exit?
It was longer to what I'd say was the MVP. It was basically a year and a half getting to there, and then it was only a year at most until exit. And exit ended up being sooner than we thought, and of course, over most corporate cycles, if you're successful, if you build a public company, you're going to spend a lot more time refining it than figuring out what you should be doing in the first place and with whom. But in any event, I think people tend to underinvest in that early period. So you're always good to put the brakes on and have it take longer. I mean, I was just saying to someone, a good idea will be a good idea 18 months later. It won't be a good idea 5 years later, but it will be a good idea 18 months later.
I hope somebody tweets that. That's an awesome quote. So you were the CEO. What was it like for you in the trenches of this process? I mean, I'm sure people came into the company with different ideas of how long this was going to take. I mean, give us some war stories. I mean, was it frustrating at times?
So, I mean, there is nothing more frustrating than deciding you're an entrepreneur, quitting your job, doing your startup, and then when people ask you what you're doing, you're telling them kind of nonsense because you're working on whatever prototype you worked on that week, and you have no name for your product, and you kind of force yourself to tread water for that early period and actually not hire engineers until you have a clearer sense of what direction you're going in. That's a very frustrating period. But the benefits later on, when you can kind of feel more sure, are tremendous. That's kind of one side. Another side is we hired the type of people and created the type of process that would let us learn. And that meant making decisions more collaboratively. It meant constantly user testing, bringing people in every single week, a half dozen to a dozen, to go through interviews and work on mock flows and try things out. And you move really slowly. And, it's frustrating having so many cooks in the kitchen. But the result was when we got good at that process a year later, and when we've done enough of these user tests every single week that we got good at user testing, it's a lot less stressful to run the company. Because there's some basis in why you're making decisions other than, your hunch that day.
Okay, and I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience here since we got a few minutes left, and I've got one final question for you. So, anybody questions for Max real quick? Okay, Pierre.
How much did you spend in the first 6 months? I mean,
how much money?
Yes.
It was entirely bootstrapped. I mean, we spent probably $25,000 to $50,000. I mean, none of us founders were earning money. We weren't coding. We had some people we hired relatively inexpensively to put things together, but it wasn't until we kind of picked the product that we raised seed financing.
I was wondering if you could speak more about the testing process. I was wondering if you could speak more about the testing process.
So this is on user tests?
Yeah.
So there's kind of two types of, or let me put it this way, I think there's three types of development. There's hunch-driven development, where you basically build what you think you should be building, and that involves a lot of whiteboards and a lot of smart people and a lot of late-night brainstorms, and it tends to be pretty wrong. Then there's qualitative user-driven development, where essentially you are bringing people in and you're doing some type of study. It's not statistically relevant. You're basically asking people what they think about this, what they think about that. And there's an entire methodology here in how not to ask leading questions, and you can be very, very rigorous and do these kinds of things where you follow people around throughout their day and see what they're doing. We chose to be very unrigorous, but to do a lot of them. So we were doing half a dozen to a dozen people coming in for 30-minute sessions, and maybe we'd show them, the next version of the site and ask them to accomplish tasks. Maybe we'd show them a landing page and say, how would you describe this to your friend? Maybe we'd ask them, how do you make X, Y, Z decision? What about this? What about that? And then the third type of product-driven design, or third type of design process is quantitative design, where you run A/B tests in very large numbers, and you tap into, some existing ad network or AdWords to try out, is it A or B? For some products, that's easier to do early stage than in others. When I look at a product like Google Search, all of their design process is quantitative user-driven design.
Hello. When you mentioned the 6 months of conceptualizing and then the 1 year of implementing, during that conceptualizing, is this what you mean? You're also getting user feedback, you're having your validated loops. Means that in your conceptualizing period? Is that what you meant?
Yeah, we're doing that. What we're also doing is literally building prototypes about 1 a month, sending them out to friends and friends of friends as if this was a product we just discovered, and seeing, did anyone click on the email? Did anyone go through and sign up? Did anyone actually use it? If they used it, did anyone use it the week after? And when your answer is, 0% to all of those, it tends to tell you that even though you love this idea and you think it's going to change the world, it might not be worth pursuing.
Max, thank you so much for your time. Let's give Max a round of applause here. So Max, as a final question, we're going to, in appreciation for your time, we would like to shamelessly promote something of yours. So if we can ask you to tweet something, and I'm going to ask everybody to retweet it. If there's something you want to get out as a promotional, we're more than happy to do that for you. Appreciation for you spending your time with us here in DC. So we'll be looking.
Oh, I'm going to have to think of something good then. All right.
Lean Startup DC hashtag, we'll find it.
All right.
Thanks a lot, Max. Thanks everybody for coming. Really, thanks. Just once again, emphasize thank you, Sean and Sean, for presenting. It's really tough to get up here and have your heart on your sleeve like that and talk about all the mistakes you've made. And it lets me feel like I'm not alone when I hear how hard this is for people who are trying to do it and guys that have been successful at it. So thanks everybody for coming. The best part of the event is coming up. It's when we all go to dusk and have a beer and get to chat about what we're working on. So hope you can stay. We do have to exit the room right away, so I'm going to have to ask everyone to sort of clean up and pick up your stuff and move out of here and take the conversation down the street. I'm going to lead the Merry Man procession down to M Street where dusk is in the West End. So thanks again, everyone.